Hi, my name's Lou Eisen. Welcome to Ring Talk. Today we have a fantastic show. We have one of my true heroes, Professor Randy Roberts. He's the 150th anniversary history professor at Purdue University. The man is brilliant. If you looked up brilliant in the dictionary, his face would be there. You recognize him. This man is known throughout the world. He has written almost 30 brilliant books. His most recent is A Season in the Sun, Mickey Mantle, which I just ordered. I can't wait to read. His books are definitive. I loved his book, as people have been mentioning on screen, Papa Jack on Jack Johnson. Joe Lewis' book had me in tears, Hard Times Man, which is the greatest title I've ever heard, and also his fantastic book on Jack Dempsey. And today we're going to discuss his groundbreaking book, Blood Brothers. About the fatal friendship between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. I just wanted to mention that Professor Roberts has been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 4 times. Most people can't spell it, the word Pulitzer. This man is brilliant, and it's a tremendous privilege and pleasure to have him on the show today. Please welcome Mr. Roberts.
Hey, Lou, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I hope I have this light okay. I hope it shows.
Oh, it's fine.
Okay, great.
It's fine. I was rereading. I thought, this week, with your wonderful book, I would reread a couple pages, and then of course I end up rereading the book because I can't put it down, which is a habit that happens with all your books. Of course, you pick them up, you start to read them, and then, you can't put them down. I had questions to ask you about the relationship between Muhammad and Malcolm X. And I guess the first question I want to ask you is, what did each man get from each other that they didn't get from anyone else? What was a key that?
That's that's a fantastic question. What did they get? They got a sense of of confidence, I think, from each other. Ali had a sense of destiny about him, but I'm not sure he knew what his destiny was going to be. I think he felt that he was a man of destiny. He said he was a man of destiny from the very beginning. But if someone would have asked him, well, what will your destiny be? Then he would be, heavyweight champion of the world, youngest heavyweight champion. I don't really think he had an ideology, a mission to go with that sense of destiny. Whereas when Malcolm came into his life, he saw something. Malcolm made sense to him. Okay, the world didn't make sense to him. The racism in the world, the bitterness of his father, the terrible divisions between black and white, the discrimination of black, that didn't make sense to him. He didn't see the logic. Malcolm was the key. Malcolm opened the door. Malcolm provided the logic of the world, the logic of racism in America, of being stripped of his name as soon as he came to America, be turned into a slave with ancestors. So that it's easy on that side. And I think Clay at that time when they met, gave Malcolm a sense of this is the future of black men, of the black women in America. Proud, beautiful, confident. Before Ali, again, before Clay, Malcolm was dealing a lot with people like himself who had been through the prison system, who had felt the hard times, whose horizons were frankly very limited. I mean, you get out of prison, you're a black man, you get out of a prison at you go in at 17 or 18 or 19 and you get out of first time 25 or so, and you spent 6 years, you have virtually no education. Where do you go from there? That's tough. The Nation of Islam tried to present a discipline and tried to present an avenue out, but it was hard to see. Ali comes in, he's just different class. Yes.
Is it surprisingly hooked up given their divergent backgrounds that Malcolm's father was murdered and he had white school teachers telling him he would be nothing, and Ali really grew up in the black middle class in Louisville, but for whatever reason their personalities just instantly clicked.
Yeah, they saw so much of each other in one another. I mean, they were both stood tall. They were both proud. They were both good looking. They were both, unbelievably articulate. They just presented the same kind of an image in the world. Although you're right, Malcolm comes from a more downtrodden. Ali comes from, he's middle class. He's not worried about what he's going to eat tomorrow. He's got two parents. They're great parents, but he can see the bitterness in his father. He can see the residue of racism all around him in Louisville. I mean, they live in a nice community neighborhood, but it's an all black neighborhood. This is not a segregated town at all.
Right, and Kentucky didn't join the Confederacy, right, during the Civil War. They stayed separate. They were the Union.
That's exactly right. But it was a border state. It was like Tennessee. There were battles fought in Kentucky, but it was like Tennessee that there was not much Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana could really do because they were so quickly grasped, Maryland the same way, so quickly taken over by the Union.
When was the first meeting between Ali and Cassius Clay and Malcolm? Did this occur in New York or Detroit?
Detroit. It was there was a convention at that time. The Nation of Islam was holding a convention, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was going to speak. And an acquaintance of Ali, a person he had met when he was training down in Miami Beach, called him up. Captain Sam called him up and said, "Hey, Ali had met Captain Sam in Miami, but Captain Sam said, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is going to speak in Detroit. Would you like to go? Get a chance, maybe meet Malcolm X." And Ali and his brother Rahman, who was Rudy at the time, said, "Yeah, sure." And they pick him up and they drive him up, and they met at a luncheonette before Elijah Muhammad spoke. And Clay, of course, knew who Malcolm X was. He had heard Malcolm X's, saw him on television, and listened to his speeches when he could, but he had never met him. And so he goes up to him and sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Cassius Clay." And Elijah Muhammad says, "Great." Elijah Muhammad had no idea who he was. Cassius Clay assumed that every person in Christendom knew who he was. But Malcolm was not a particular big boxing fan, didn't follow sports. The Nation of Islam really kind of condemned professional sports. But they saw each other. They got along. They spoke a little bit. And then they started seeing each other secretly over the next few years.
It's surprising what you say because, as you said, the Nation of Islam condemned sports, especially boxing, which they looked at as black men fighting for the pleasure of white man, for the white man's money, and white men getting all the money. But they made an exception for Cassius Clay. Was that to benefit them because he was becoming so big at the time?
They didn't make an exception immediately, but because you got to remember the heavyweight champion at this time is Sonny Liston. And Sonny Liston seemed to be invincible. And Sonny Liston basically was invincible. I mean, I think Sonny Liston in a 3-year period, I think 3 major fights, they were all ended in the first round. So he had fought very few rounds when he fought him. So they didn't want to go out on a limb and say, this guy's a member of the Nation of Islam. And Clay probably wasn't a member of the Nation of Islam at that time. Very sympathetic to the movement. And he had heard that there was a famous song, heaven is a white man's heaven is a black man's hell.
Louis Farrakhan, yeah.
Yeah, and Clay had listened to that. He had listened to speeches of Malcolm X and listened to speech of Elijah Muhammad. And so he understood what the nation was all about, but he hadn't joined yet. Because if he had out and out joined and said, "I'm a member of the Nation of Islam," this Nation of Islam and black Muslims were viewed as a kind of a hate group at this time. And if he had said that, his career would have been effectively over. He would have never gotten a shot at the heavyweight title. So he keeps it quiet. As far as the nation goes, excuse me. As far as the nation goes, Ali is, it's interesting. They're sort of interested. Elijah Muhammad and some others are interested that this guy is following the Nation of Islam, is sympathetic to the Nation of Islam, but they're not going to go out on the limb and say, yeah, we're embracing him when if he fights for the title against Listins, he's just going to get slaughtered anyway, knocked out in a round or two. The nation didn't need that.
Right. Why did the Nation of Islam target Malcolm X for, I guess, redemption or to help him off his heroin habit in prison? Why him?
Malcolm was a great recruit for the Nation of Islam, or not I wouldn't say a great recruit at first, but it was really Malcolm's brother who became a member of the Nation of Islam first. And then he kind of recruited Malcolm X. And then Malcolm was in prison, but he started to read up. Okay. He started, okay, this makes sense. And when Malcolm got out of prison, he went to go see Elijah Muhammad and wants to work for them. And then they see Elijah Muhammad and the other nation members see, this guy's great. We're trying to build an organization. This guy is dynamic. He's a speaker. He will attract all sorts of people, particularly people like himself who spent time and in prison. And we're looking for something. And he has the answers. And his mosque, where he preaches in Harlem, becomes the leading place for the Nation of Islam. And he's the top money maker. He's the top recruiter. He's the guy that when the show back in late 50s came out, early 60s, on the hate that America produced by Mike Wallace.
Right.
Malcolm X is the face of the Nation of Islam. He's a far more dynamic speaker and dynamic person than Elijah Muhammad ever was.
Well, that's that leads to my next question. Do you think Elijah Muhammad saw him later on as a threat to his own leadership?
Saw Malcolm?
To Malcolm, yes.
Absolutely. And there's no question about, by the time, Malcolm's going to be killed by members of the Nation of Islam. And by the time that Malcolm dies, he's already split from the Nation of Islam. He's beginning to organize a splinter movement in which he wants Ali to play a central role, to be the Malcolm X of his new movement.
That's my favorite thing in your book. It captures this incredible time in American and world history, from Kennedy's assassination on November 22nd, 1963, to Ali's ascension. He's almost picking up the throne of Kennedy in February of 64. And that, I don't know how many people today younger than us would realize how important that was in determining not just the future of the United States, but the future of the entire world. And you have Ali and you have Malcolm together at the time before he challenged Liston for the title. Ali was getting criticized, as you well know, in the white newspapers. He doesn't know how to fight. He pulls back. He doesn't sit down on his punches. He doesn't know how to jab. He moves too much. Did Malcolm do anything to ignore this criticism, or that it was white criticism, just to keep doing what you're doing?
Well, I think Ali was extraordinarily confident in his own boxing style. Okay, he's not changing. A little bit. Angelo Dundee changed a few things, got him to do one thing or another, but Angelo Dundee was a very strong believer in a fighter style is a fighter style.
Right.
Don't tinker with it too much. Don't try to turn an Ali into a power puncher. Don't try to turn Sonny Liston, though he didn't manage. He would have said, don't try to turn Sonny Liston into a dancer, into a Sugar Ray Robinson. Right. Greatness is greatness, and it's different. Ali pulled back from punches. Okay, nobody pulls back from punches. As people have said, it's like being on a train track when a train's coming and trying to pull back from a train. It's not going to work. You're going to get hit. And Ali did get hit a few times. I mean, Doug Jones really, hit him hard. And so hands were too low, but his hands were so fast. I mean, what he could do, no other heavyweight could do. So, you had that. What Malcolm brings to the equation is confidence. that again, there's a higher power at work here.
Mm-hmm.
Allah, the supreme God, the supreme ruler. Okay, he has a destiny for you, and that's why Malcolm X goes into the locker room, dressing room before the Liston fights, and he prays with Ali. They bow to Mecca, bow to the east, and he at that time says, God, Allah has not brought you to this point in your life to let you lose. You're part of his greater plan. He has a purpose for you, and it's not to be knocked out in the first round by Sonny Liston. And so Ali's able to go out there confident that he can win.
Well,
or if not, he was going to fake it till he makes it, because he had this confidence.
Well, I mean, I love that story. Angelo Dundee was like a surrogate father to me. So I love that fact that you mentioned a key point. Angelo learned from Charlie Goldman, who trained Rocky Marciano, that no one invents a game to be beaten at their own game. So just like you said, you're good at that. And Ali's style, as Angelo would point out, was only ever intended to work for Ali. It wasn't for anyone else. And it was so unique to him. And the point you bring up about Malcolm in the dressing room is fascinating, because Ali admitted years later that he was a bit nervous. But after the first round, he goes to his corner and Angelo says, "How about that? You're still here."
Yeah.
And Liston hadn't trained for the fight. I was wondering, in '63, November 22nd, when President Kennedy was assassinated, Elijah Muhammad put out an order that no one's to comment on it.
That's right.
And Malcolm didn't listen. He made the famous, chickens coming home. Is that what marked him for death eventually, or was it the comment about the philandering of Elijah Muhammad?
I think it's when he started talking about Elijah Muhammad's personal life, the philandering, the children born out of wedlock. I think that's what really causes that. He will be, after he says the chickens comes home to roost, that whole statement, that brouhaha, he'll be put on suspension, kind of suspended. You can't say anything in public at all. And at that time, I think Elijah Muhammad was trying to figure out, he's probably gone. Okay. And there were, Elijah was an older man, and the idea is he wasn't going to be around forever. Who's going to replace Elijah? And he had kids that wanted to replace him. There were a lot of different contending forces within the Nation of Islam. I don't really think Malcolm X envisioned himself as the replacement of Elijah Muhammad, but certainly the other contending forces saw him as the greatest threat, because again, he's a cowbell of the movement. He's the one that brings in the troops. He brings in the people. He brings in the publicity. He brings it all to them. So they're worried about him. And so eventually, when he does start to speak to reporters, when he shows up in Miami, when he's such a presence where he's always beside Cassius Clay, still, that's when the nation decides that there's going to be an irrevocable split.
Why didn't it adversely affect Elijah Muhammad when these revelations came out?
The believers were the believers. The
right.
Critics were the critics. Today, we can look, and I hate to go into today's politics or anything, but
Trump, yeah.
Regardless of what we learn about Trump or investigations, I mean, he's still going to have his supporters. Okay, if you're a believer, if you're a true believer, you believe the leader. You believe. Even Malcolm X, when he would talk about Elijah Muhammad, okay, and he would talk to Clay and teach Clay the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, of the Nation of Islam, he would always preface it by saying, "The Honorable Elijah Muhammad says this. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad says this." So he was always teaching Clay that the voice of God, the voice of Allah in America is Elijah Muhammad. It's not Malcolm X. These pearls of wisdom that Malcolm would spout out, they're not coming from me. they're coming from Elijah Muhammad, okay, who speaks with God, who speaks with Allah. So, this is what people believe. They're not going to believe what some white reporter says. They're not going to believe what they read in the New York Times. They're going to believe what they read in Muhammad Speaks, and that's the organ of the Nation of Islam newspaper.
When you look at the history of the Nation of Islam, W.D. Fard I believe, was a white man, and he disappeared. And there were rumors that Elijah Muhammad had done away with him, but is there any evidence to make that credible?
I'm going to go back and look at that. I thought Fard was a black man, very light skinned.
Okay, my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah. Is there any evidence to what?
That Elijah Muhammad. Yeah.
No credible information that I know of. It's those early years, very difficult to reconstruct. Historians work with sources, and there just isn't, to my knowledge, that great of sources on that period.
Right. Okay. Jimmy Dundee, Angelo's son, was saying that a couple months before the Liston fight, he was playing I Spy with Muhammad. And on the walkie-talkie, he said, "Here I am, Cassius." And Cassius said, "It's not Cassius. You know that, Jimmy. It's now Muhammad Ali." So did he make the switch, just not tell people before that?
He was certainly moving to the Nation of Islam. Now, as far as I know, and this is an area certainly I looked at, and my co-author Johnny Smith looked at. It wasn't until a week or so after Ali, Cassius Clay became heavyweight champion, that Elijah Muhammad gave him the name Muhammad Ali. Okay. And that was supposed to be, the idea was that, if you're really faithful, first you were given your slave name was taken away, and you were given an X. So you would have been Cassius X. Okay. And he would have stayed Cassius X, just like you had Malcolm X, and you had all sorts of, there'd be William 3X, 4X, what have you. And then if you, after a certain period of time, indefinable, it could be years, it could be decades, you would be given your new name. Elijah Muhammad was a new name. Malcolm X, when Cassius joins the movement, he becomes Cassius X. But he's only Cassius X for about a week or so. And then Elijah Muhammad says, I am giving you a new name, Muhammad Ali. As long as you follow me in my organization. You go with Malcolm X, that's not your name. That's not your name. And we don't want to have any part of you. Okay. You're part of that splinter organization, which we're taking care of. But if you stay with me, if you follow my teachings, then you're Muhammad Ali.
Well, that brings up a very interesting point. If Ali stood by Malcolm X, does Malcolm X still get assassinated, or is that not possible? I mean,
Well, it's a counterfactual question, so it is impossible to answer. But I'll say this: Malcolm X believed that if Ali would have gone with him, that he would have probably gone back into the movement, into the Nation of Islam, that he would have had such an important person to go with him back into the Nation of Islam, the new heavyweight champion. He wasn't defeated by Sonny Liston. He defeated Sonny Liston. And he could say, I defeated Sonny Liston because I believe in Allah, that I'm a follower of Elijah Muhammad. That's the way Malcolm X thought. When Ali doesn't go with Malcolm X, when he stays with Elijah Muhammad, then Malcolm X knows he's a dead man walking, and his mood starts to change. He spends less and less time in the United States, and he frets that it's just a matter of days, weeks, that I'm a dead man walking, essentially. I mean, his house was burned down, was firebombed.
Right.
Yes. When his children are in there, so he knows what's coming.
The converse side of that is, if Ali stands by him, does that threaten Ali's own life? In other words, did the Nation of Islam say to Ali, if you value your life, you'll drop him and stay with us.
Certainly, Ali, in later years, after he leaves the nation, will say that. Will say that, I know what happens if you leave the nation. I mean, it wasn't like Malcolm X was the first person to be, punished deeply for splitting away from the movement or criticizing the movement. Other members of the Nation of Islam that had left had received extraordinary beatings. Anyway, so they knew that Ali knew it was a possibility.
That's just an incredible time.
It is, it's an amazing, if you look at it, it's like a new culture's being born between the Kennedy assassination and then February 25th, 1964 fight at Liston and Ali and in Miami. You have the Beatles come to America during that period. There's almost like a revolution in music that's taking place. It's like the emergence of the 1960s. If somebody asked me to talk about the 1960s, I say the 1960s really began with the assassination, with the Beatles, with Ali coming. Up until that time, we're still in the 50s. But suddenly there's a new age, the age of Aquarius, I guess. Is that what the song says?
Yes.
I'm not sure it mentions Ali in the age of Aquarius, but
no,
it should.
But you had a fantastic point, as you always do. Ali said, as you know, right after beating Liston, I talk to God every day. If God's with me, can't nobody beat me.
Yeah.
And I mean, that incredible time period, Ali's almost at the forefront of three different movements. I mean, later on he is, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, and the youth movement, all coalescing together.
Yeah. They all come around that guy, just as they, those movements come around the Beatles too. I mean, really, to me, the iconic poles, the iconic forces of the 1960s are Ali and the Beatles. I mean, certainly from a cultural, sporting perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a story Angelo told me that when they first met at the Fifth Street Gym, Ali did one of his old lines to John Lennon, "You're not as dumb as you look."
Yeah.
Lennon, as you know, Lennon said, "Yeah, but you are." And then years later, in the 70s, he apologized to Muhammad Ali. He said, "I really feel bad about that. I didn't know you, how great you were, how moral you were in standing up against the war." And Ali said, "It's just a joke. I wasn't upset at all." And apparently Lennon was shocked that it meant nothing to Ali when he said. Ali laughed.
Lou, one time I was at a convention, at a university, and there was a symposium that was being done on Ali. And you had academics like myself giving papers on Ali. And I gave a paper on Ali that I talked about. I'm not even sure what I talked about at this time. But afterwards, what I remember is there was a cocktail party hosted by the head of the history department at Miami University in Ohio. And Ali attended the sessions, attended the program, and he listened to my talk and listened to the other talks. Wow. And he was at the program. He was at the cocktail party. And at that time, Parkinson had set in. He didn't speak with the same alacrity that he used to. And so he was sort of standing around, people were talking and drinking. So I went over to Ali. I went over to the host first and I said, "Do you have a stack of cards? You have a deck of cards?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And he brought it to me because I know Ali loved magic tricks. He loves card tricks. So I said, "Hey, champ, how about a card trick?" Him and I. So he took a card and he did a card trick. And I took the pack and I did one. Let's face it, we all have probably 2 card tricks in our bag. And I used my 2 and he used probably his 2 and he had some other ones. But before he went, he gave me one of those hands shaking towards me and said, "You're not as dumb as you look." And so I felt that's great. That I had Ali give me one of those too.
That's fantastic. I have several other questions. At that time, this is sort of a point. It's hard to say, but the hit on. Before I get to that, how close was Bill McDonald, the promoter, the money man, to canceling the fight if Muhammad doesn't go to the media and say, I'm not a Muslim, it's all a mistake, announced him.
Well, of course, Ali never said that.
Right.
But Malcolm left. Ali said, I will not say I'm not a Muslim. Okay. I'm not going to betray the Muslims, the Nation of Islam. McDonald says he's ready to call the fight off. And that's when Malcolm X said, look, I'll leave. Okay. Malcolm's the flashpoint here. I'll leave, but I'm coming back for the fight. But I'll leave until, maybe a week's before he comes back for the fight. And so McDonald said, okay, it's going to go on. Okay. Is that true? It's hard to say. When has negative publicity really negatively affected a prize fight?
Right.
Negative publicity sometimes will build up a prize fight. Had they built those two contrasts together, who knows what would happen if Sonny Liston suddenly was wearing the good guy's shirt and hat. I don't know. It could have been interesting. So McDonald had a lot of money to lose, and he probably did lose a fair amount of money on the fight.
He did, but Angelo Dundee told me he didn't lose it because of Malcolm. He lost it because people didn't think it was going to be a competitive fight.
Yeah, look at what happened with Patterson in the Vegas fight with Patterson and Liston, the second fight. Come on, you fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And 2 1-round knockouts.
And the words Angelo used where he said Muhammad was an amusing flake. That's what the newspaper said. And he said out of something like 99 sports writers, 93 picked Liston within 2 rounds, 2 from New York, 1 from Britain, said Clay could win because he's only, like you said earlier, he's only fought 3 rounds in the last 3 years, 1 against Albert Westphal, 2 against Patterson, and he hasn't really trained. So, but still, Liston was the big favorite, as you said. And Angelo, told me that Ali was on his bus. He was leaving because after McDonald gave him the ultimatum, but Chris Dundee said, I'll tell you what, don't announce that you're a Muslim. Wait 1 day till you win the title. And then after that, it's a fait accompli. They can't do anything about it.
Yep. And that's what he did the day afterwards at the press conference. Yeah, it was a tumultuous time. And boxing was on the slide at that time too. I mean, Ali really resurrects the sport. You had the boxing hearings, you had the commission talking about crime and exploitation in boxing. You have the fight between Emil Griffith and Benny Kid Paret, and Paret dies in the ring. I'm trying to think. This was a little before Davey Moore died, wasn't it? It was Davey.
Right. It was just before, but they all happened within the same time period because Alejandro Lavarani, the heavyweight, died just after that too.
Yeah, he went. Yeah, he was knocked into a coma.
Right.
He died a few years later, I believe. I read, that was a sad story. I know he went back to Argentina and he died in Argentina.
That's right.
I'm not sure he ever really came out of the coma that he.
No, he didn't. No, and with the fight with Benny Kid Paret, Angelo and other people had gone to Manuel Ferro, Paret's manager, and said he's a shot fighter after what he took from Gene Fulmer.
Oh, Gene Fulmer just
brutalized him.
Yeah.
And Paret complained before the fight. He had blood from his nose, blood from his ears, his head hurt. And his trainer apparently said to Angelo, if he dies, I get another one. And Angelo said he's a shot fighter. You can't put him in against anyone. You have to retire him. But in Ring of Fire, the DVD on him or the video, his wife said he was illiterate in both Spanish and English. What else was he going to do? There was nothing. He had no money. The money he got paid for the last Griffith fight was stolen. There was no 40 grand there. He had no money. Yeah. And he'd been getting good money for a lot of fights. And this was the mob. And so this leads to my next question. Is it a myth to say that the Nation of Islam got rid of the mob's control of boxing?
Well, of course, the mob never controlled Cassius Clay.
Right.
He's pretty clean. Came out of the Olympics, went with Angelo. And Angelo, I think, was pretty much up and up. Although, I mean, Angelo had met Frankie Carpo one time, which was a great story. You probably know they met in an elevator. And
Right.
Angelo said, you're Frankie Carpo. He says, nope, I'm not. He says, I don't know you and you don't know me, and let's keep it that way.
And his brother Chris almost had a stroke when he told him the story.
Yeah. Now, Chris knew Frankie Carpo. But, so Ali was pretty clean, just like Patterson was pretty clean, because of his manager.
Yeah.
But certainly the nation protected Ali. Protected maybe is the wrong word, but he kept Ali from the clutches of the mob, but not from the clutches of the Nation of Islam. He lost his money that way. He didn't retire with that much either. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Muhammad refuses to be inducted and makes a stand, the nation didn't financially support him or pay for his lawyers or anything. Joe Frazier helped him out. I mean, other people helped him out. Why did they abandon him?
That's a great question. Maybe there was a sense that he's not the money earner that he once was. That he was, his publicity was not the good publicity that it once provided the nation. Hard to say.
Is it also in that time America? There's that video of him before the Chicago Athletic Commission where the guy addresses him as Cassius Clay, and he says Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. And was it because of the color of his skin and the fact that he joined the Nation of Islam that, it created such a ruckus, but people changed their religion and their name all the time.
Well, virtually every actor and actress was changing their names, and boxers sometimes changed their names, would shorten their names or what have you. It's just that the Nation of Islam was viewed as it was so divisive. And it continued to be viewed as an anti-white organization. And therefore, the media is controlled as essentially it's a white controlled media. And so this was the way they covered Ali. And it was, had they understood the nation a little bit more, maybe they wouldn't. Had they viewed the nation more, which what it was a nationalistic, that it was black for black. It was a sense of nationhood. It was a sense of that we will take care of ourselves. It was an uplifting movement that tried to divorce itself from whites. It was not really an anti-white hate group at all.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in Toronto recently for a B'nai B'rith Anti-Defamation League conference on anti-Semitism, and he spoke about Louis Farrakhan, and he spoke about NBA players that made anti-Semitic comments, and he said they're not anti-Semitic, they're just stupid. He said it's different with Farrakhan, who is anti-Semitic, and he said I was asked to join the nation in the '60s, but he said they're not Muslims.
Yeah, well, that's, and of course Ali's going to follow Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, when he takes over the nation, and they move in a more traditional Islamic direction.
Right, and Ali was a Sufi Muslim, wasn't he? More moderate.
Yeah.
Because Ali didn't really hate anyone. He got along with everyone. He didn't really distinguish between color and religion. His grandkids, one of his grandkids was bar mitzvah, and he was at the bar mitzvah.
No, I think Ali, there seems to be very few people he disliked. I don't even think he disliked, it's hard for me to say, but I don't think he really even disliked Joe Frazier. I think Ali felt that what he said in a boxing match was to build up the gate, and everybody was going to win because it was going to bring more money in. And I think it kind of shocked them that some people took it real personally. Joe Frazier took it personally. Joe Frazier disliked Muhammad Ali. I won't say hated, but and then that rift was never settled.
No. Do you think part of it on Muhammad's part was the fact that Muhammad felt he was standing up for civil rights for African Americans, and that Frazier and other black fighters shouldn't be going after the title because it's my title. I'm doing this for you, so you should respect that. But Frazier's attitude is, I got a family. I have to make a living. This is what I do.
Yeah. And Frazier, he was the one that, if you talked about the upbringing, I mean, this is a guy that's born desperately poor in South Carolina. And, he had to struggle a whole lot more than than Cassius ever struggled, Muhammad.
That's right. I mean, he always said that. He said, yeah. I grew up really poor and I had to leave South Carolina because I'd beaten up a white guy. And if I didn't leave, I would have been lynched.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. I mean, did Muhammad ever resolve in himself, you think, that his regret over abandoning Malcolm, because he loved Malcolm?
Oh, yeah. And you could see this in his when he was, after he died, at his funeral service, where one of Malcolm's daughters spoke, eloquently. I think he did love Malcolm, and I think he continued to. They were just divided, and there's no question. He, in his later years, said how much he regretted how he treated Malcolm. It wasn't right, because at the time, he was saying things like, "If you oppose the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you deserve to die." I mean, he was very strident in his opposition, and I think he also regretted how he treated Joe Louis, calling Joe Louis an Uncle Tom. And Joe Louis was the furthest thing from being an Uncle Tom. Joe Louis was a really incredibly decent person, was a race man who stood up for the blacks and for his race, and loved his race. And he was not an Uncle Tom, but Ali, kind of did that to him, put that label on him.
That's one of the most profoundly upsetting things to me. Your book on Joe Louis was brilliant, and the title is the best title I've heard for any book ever, Hard Times Man, because people don't realize Joe Louis had a stutter, and people made fun of him. I had a stutter, and when you have a stutter, you don't want to talk.
Yeah.
But Louis was very for civil rights and did so many things behind the scenes, and calling Truman Gibson, as you all know, and other people in the government, and get it done that way. He wasn't a guy to put it out in your face. But I mean, as you said, I think Joe Louis is the single greatest athlete ever to have lived, and certainly the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. No one could do what Louis did in the ring.
No, I loved writing that book on Joe Louis.
That comes through.
Yeah, there's two types of people I think sometimes you see in this world, and people make a difference. Some are earth shakers, and Ali was an earth shaker. Some are ground smoothers, okay, that try to calm things down and smooth it out and make progress in that way. I think Louis, and to some degree, was a ground smoother. But Louis was, this is when the title of the book comes from the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, where it says, that in hard times, during the Depression, God sends us somebody to get us through it. In the Great Depression, he sent us, Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson. And so that's where I got I like that. So I got Hard Times Man, but Joe Louis was the Hard Times Man, that he was sent for a reason. And you talk about a universally loved person, particularly among blacks, that divided nobody. Joe Louis was just amazing. And this is Louis's time was a time where, the greatest team title you could have was World Series champions. The greatest individual title was the heavyweight championship of the world. Boxing and baseball, that was it. It wasn't basketball, it wasn't football, it was boxing and baseball at a professional level.
Yeah, my father told me when he was growing up in Toronto, he was born in 1928, so he remembered when Joe Louis fought Schmeling. He was 9 or 10, and he said he remembered going to synagogue, and the rabbis would say prayers for Joe Louis. And he said in Toronto, and then I realized later, of course, when I saw an interview with the actor Jack Klugman, this was all over North America and Europe. The streets were dead empty. All you could hear was radios in every household and apartment. the fight, because that fight was for the championship of not just the heavyweight title, but the way the war would turn out, as Bud Schulberg said. And no one can really know today. I mean, of course you do, but it's hard for people today to understand how much Joe Louis meant to the entire world. I mean, Jews in Germany listened to the fight, and when Louis won, it gave them hope.
Yeah, Woody Guthrie in his autobiography talks about, I think he was in Santa Fe at the time, walking across through the town of Santa Fe and just listening to fight on radio. That every window was open, the sound, every radio was turned on to that fight. And of course, Jimmy Carter talks about where he grew up in Georgia, Plains, Georgia, that his father had a radio, and some of the black men that worked on the farm was asked if they could come and listen to the fight, and father said yes, and 100 or more blacks showed up, way more than they thought, and they stayed outside. Okay, they never came in the house, but the radio was turned up so you could hear it outside. And Jimmy Carter said after the fight was over, that quietly everybody, all the farmers went back to their huts, and he said, and afterwards all hell broke loose. They just were, there was just a huge celebration that took place. That's Jimmy Carter is one of the great memories of his childhood, he said.
Wow. Angelo Dundee told me one time he saw Joe Louis in Vegas at Caesars, and they, as you know, they gave him money to gamble with.
Yeah.
And Joe Louis approached Angelo quickly and said, "Listen, I just lost. I need you to lend me $5,000." And this is, he said, 1971, 72. And he said, $5,000. When will I get it back? And he said, my next fight. And he said, when's your next fight? He said, when you try to get the money back from me.
That's a great story. Same token. Billy Conn was out in Caesars, and Joe was there. And Joe was the same way. He was giving his pocket money that he would gamble away every night, or he would give it away. Okay. People would come up to him and hit Joe up. Joe, I have a sad story. Can you give me 500? Can you give me 100? Can you do this? And Billy was with him, and a few people came up, and Joe gave money to him. And Billy Conn said, Joe, that guy was he was bullshitting. Okay. He didn't, he was giving you a line. And Joe said, I know, but I was just going to lose the money anyway. Yeah, he was going to lose it at the table anyway. So,
it's interesting. I think that Ali, the things he said about Louis, I think Ali was sort of annoyed that Louis would never give him credit for being as great as he was. And Louis had to know how great Ali was because of how great Joe Louis was.
Sure. Joe Louis, did he ever put down a fighter in his life? I don't think so. No matter how bad he beat did he defend a title like 25 times or something like that? No matter how many people he beat badly, he'd always say, "Oh, he was a good contender. He hit me really hard sometimes." He was a worthy contender. He never trashed anybody, even Schmeling. He didn't trash.
No, that's right. And, there's that show, Kurt Gowdy was hosting a show years later. I can't remember what it's called, on NBC with Galento. And Galento's getting angry. I'm not a bum, and I was never a bum. And Kurt Gowdy says, Joe never called you a bum.
The way it was. Is that the show?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And you remember after the fight, was Galento good? He hit me hard enough to knock me down. Got to be good to do that.
Yeah, he hit me. It's exactly what he said. And Galantos was the one that called everybody a bum. And I think Louis said, what for does that fat little man call me a bum?
And Galento would call him and say horrible things about his wife. So Louis wanted to kill him in the ring. And you saw every punch almost raised a cut on Galento, but he butchered him after he got up from the knockdown.
Oh, what a beating, Glenn. It's hard to imagine taking those kind of punches. That's the other thing with Ali, that I think he showed in the fight with Liston, that first fight, though people didn't want to say it. But when he gets the Menzel solution or whatever. He gets into his
yeah.
eyes and he can't see. And he has that round where people, in people's imaginations, they think he just danced around Lewis until he could see. In point of fact, not Lewis, around Liston. But in point of fact, Liston hit him hard during that period of time. I mean, Ali has absorbed an unbelievable amount of punches. And he showed what he showed throughout his later career is that he could take anything. I mean, he could take about any, to his detriment, he could take about any punch that anybody could deliver, whether it was Foreman or Frazier or
all of
whoever.
them.
Yeah, Norton or
Angela said that after the Liston fight, Ali's, as you just flanks, were all red and bruised, and yeah, he said Liston gave him a ferocious beating in those rounds because I read in one of, I'm not sure if it was your book or if it was a book by Thomas Hauser where they said when Ali was blinking, which was deliberate because Liston had done this to Eddie Machen and Zora Foley. I mean, this was common in boxing to put Menzel solution and blind the other guy. The only difference was Eddie Machen and Zora Foley didn't speak out about it. He was told to shut up. Eddie Machen did, and both of them died under mysterious circumstances. But Ali said it on the air after the fight. He said he blinded me. He's got dirty men in his corner. And that was almost a revolutionary thing. You wouldn't speak out against a mob publicly like that.
No, it was amazing. You know, that was an amazing fight. The other thing, of course, of that fight that I always find kind of interesting was a fight thrown, because it's as if some people want to say Liston threw the fight. Well, if he threw the fight, what was he doing putting something on his gloves to win the fight? You can't cheat to win and throw the fight, I don't think. You know,
right. No,
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I agree. And also, you know, same in the second fight when Liston goes down, that was a typical move that Angelo taught Muhammad, slip the jab. Angelo had seen on films of Liston that when he jabbed, his head was out over his front foot, which put him off balance. So he said, slip it, move to your right, hit him with a counter. And if you watch the second fight, in the first 5 seconds, Ali almost drops him with that same combination. And Liston survived. But the mob didn't allow their fighters to take dives unless they owned the fighter they were diving for.
Yeah.
And they had no point. They had no money in Ali.
Yeah. The second fight, when you watch it, the count's messed up. I mean, Liston gets to a knee. He's watching for the count. And at the count of 9, he gets up. But then Nat Fleischer says it's 14 and the fight's over. And Jersey Joe Walcott, I think, kind of doesn't know what to do. And so he says that the fight was over, that he was down, that he was out. Well, he was never down to the count of 10. He was up at 9. I mean, he was down. Yes, he was down for 14 seconds, but he followed the count, which is what you would do.
Right.
I mean, he was ready to go on.
Yeah, that was. I have a book coming out on the most controversial fights, and you know, Fleischer wasn't even there in an official capacity.
No,
he should have kept his mouth shut. He involved himself, and Liston, when asked him why you fell back or stayed down, he said, "Because Ali," and it's true, Ali was a madman. He's running around the ring.
Yeah, he's circling around me. I'm not going to get up at that time.
Yeah.
I guess Nat deserved it. You can say whatever you want to say, I guess, in a fight, but the referee and the officials shouldn't have listened to him.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the correct thing would have been for Walcott to not count until Ali went to a corner and stayed there. Liston was right that he thought Ali could have hit me or hit me with his knee. And I mean, it was a confluence. It was all these things happening simultaneously.
It would be similar to saying that Tunney lost the long fight count. Right. Because he was down on the canvas for 14 seconds or what have you. But he was just watching the referee. He was waiting for an 8 or a 9 count, and then he stood up. What? He's been down for 12 seconds or 13 seconds. It's the count that matters, not how long he's on the canvas.
That's correct. it's interesting you bring up Tony Dempsey, because in Roger Kahn's book about Dempsey, he said that there was mob influence on the referee because he said Dempsey goes down the next round and he doesn't send, Dave Barry doesn't send Tunney to the farthest neutral corner. But the thing is, Dempsey got up right away without a count.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a reason to send Tunney to the neutral corner. And everyone in boxing then was controlled by the mob. So it's not really, it wasn't uncommon at that point.
Yeah.
And Liston said after the second fight, I was on my feet fighting back.
Yeah. He got up and he was fighting back. He was going to go forward. Now, I think Ali would have won the fight, but still.
I agree. I don't think Liston would have made it out of the round even, but right, he was fighting back.
Exactly.
And there were those reports in Sports Illustrated after that Ash Resnick, his handler, said, apparently told people that don't bet on the fight. The fight's not going to go more than a round. Liston and Resnick made millions betting on Ali. But, if he's a mob fighter and it's a fixed fight and he bets with mob bookies, the word's going to go out and the odds are going to go down. He's not going to make anything.
Yeah, I think people would have, the people on the know, or a certain group of people certainly would have heard it from Resnick if there was if a fix was on. And I'm not sure I don't know what the betting odds were for that fight, but I don't think
Liston was favored.
Yeah, Liston was favored.
Yeah, he's favored to win.
Jeez.
He was favored to win when it was supposed to be in Boston, and then they said he just lost all hope when Ali had the hernia.
Yeah. That's what they say, that he was in good shape, he was ready to go, and then Ali got the hernia in Boston and got delayed for a while.
This raises an interesting point. Do you think Liston may have been one of the most profound victims then of that time period, because he was caught in between the old guard and the new guard? He didn't belong. The new people didn't want him. The youngsters, the youth movement, anti-war movement, he was illiterate. So the university crowd didn't want him. And the old guard didn't particularly like him because he was black. So, he was sort of caught in the middle. He couldn't win either way.
Sonny Liston, to me, is one of the tragic figures in boxing. I think it's appropriate is we don't know when Sonny Liston was born, the day he was born. We don't know the day that he died. As he was, his father brutalized him. His mother was not the most compassionate woman. She had her own problems. The mob
stole everything.
Maybe John Vitale and Blinky Palermo, they may have cared about him as more than anybody else. There was a Catholic priest that cared about him a little bit, and he had some friends. But certainly there were no large groups of people. Reporters made fun of him. He certainly wasn't loved in East St. Louis. He wasn't loved in Philadelphia. He was run out of Denver. Ash Resnick probably treated him as well as anybody treated him. Was he a mob fighter? Yeah, but who else cared about him?
Right, and many fight. That's one of the things, Randy, that I don't think fight fans understand, is that it wasn't the fighter's choice to be a mob fighter. You were going to do it or going to another job.
Yeah, and fighters that weren't mob fighters in the 30s and 40s were exploited by somebody else. If you're a fighter, it was like you're going to be exploited by somebody. It's a matter of who.
Right, or you could be a Billy Graham and not go with the mob, but then you're not going to get a title.
Yeah, exactly.
whether you win or not. Liston,
or a Jake LaMotta. It took a long time to get that title shot.
Even after he threw the fight to Billy Fox, he had to wait 3 years and pay $20,000.
Yeah.
So when Ali beats Liston, the mob still has Ernie Terrell, who beats Macon for the WBA title. And it looks like, the belief was for a while that, as I said earlier, the Nation of Islam indemnified, maybe that's not, protected Ali and got rid of the mob. But the mob's influence of boxing lasts right until today. They're just not as upfront as they were before.
It's a crazy sport, but
Yeah.
an interesting one.
Yes, I mean, Angelo would say to me, if you're going to talk about the mob, stop talking about mobsters around 1955, because you don't want anyone being alive coming after you. And at the Hall of Fame in New York, at Canistoga, we'd encounter people and he would say, ignore them. Don't talk to them. Don't look at them. And like you're saying, his brother Chris worked with Palermo, or Blinky Palermo and Carbo in the 30s on trains promoting fights. So for the Lucchese's, so he knew. I mean, even before the first Liston fight, right? Jack Nylon wants to know who the referee is 3-4 days before the fight.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's impossible to get their influence out of the sport, unfortunately, because it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. He said, was Ali sincere when he said he, in fact, liked Liston? He felt sad when Liston died, and he wanted a chance to be able to sit around and say, I didn't have said to you, it's just to build everything up, as he said.
Yeah, I think so too. And I honestly think that he felt that way. Again, he thought it's up to me to build the gate up. Okay, so I'm going to start this big ugly bear. I'm going to ready to go to his house in the middle of the night and wake up his neighbors and say that I'm going to fight him. I'm going to go into his training quarters and try to belittle him. But Sonny didn't get that. Okay, it was personal to Sonny. He didn't want people to talk about that he was illiterate, that pointing out his deficiencies in this or that. Supposedly, now, and you know the story as well as I do, that Liston thought that Clay was afraid of him, that they had around a gambling table in Vegas, Sonny was losing craps, and Sonny wasn't the most sunshiny guy anyway, regardless of his name, and he was in a bad mood. And Clay kept getting on him, and then Sonny backed him in the corner and slapped him hard. And Clay said, "What do you do that for?" And Sonny thought he saw fear in Clay's eyes. And so he thought, I've got this fight because this guy's already afraid of me. And then they meet in the center of the ring. And suddenly Sonny sees that this guy's pretty big. Okay, he's bigger than I thought he was. And, and he didn't look afraid of him. But I don't know. You've probably heard that story too.
Well, Angelo said when he went to the center of the ring, he told Muhammad, don't slouch like you do. Stand up straight, look down on him. You're bigger than him. You're 6'3.25". He's 6'1", and start talking to him. And Ali's saying, I got you now. You're a sucker. You're a bum. Now you fell into it. You can't escape now, Sonny. And after the first couple rounds, Sonny says to Willie Reddish, and hit. He told me he can't punch. And then you see the unmistakable look of fear in Liston's face in the 5th or 6th round when Ali bursts the mouse under his eye and starts to rock him and then starts to, he starts staggering him. And Angelo said that one of the things they put a lookalike of Lena Horne in the audience. And who wouldn't want to be? I mean, she was gorgeous. And say, you go home with her if you win. And Ali kept saying, you're not going home with Lena Horne tonight. I'm going home with Lena Horne tonight. And so Muhammad at one point, Angelo said, was calling his punches. Here it comes. Double jab right hand. And he said he was so quick, there was nothing Liston could do. He just got old.
Yeah. He was something.
Yeah, I only got to meet him a couple times through Angelo, and I asked him if he was genuinely afraid. This goes back to what you were saying about the card trick. Were you genuinely afraid of Liston? I said, what do you think? And I said, of course. And he said, you're not as dumb as you look. And I said, actually, I'm a lot dumber than I look. So if you spoke to me for half an hour, you'd realize how truly stupid I am. But thank you. But I know, speaking with George Chiavallo, who's not in great shape now, Chiavallo was hospitalized when Ali died because he loved him so much. He said, how could you not like this man? He's making you money. He's your friend. He comes to your house. He meets your family. I mean, he said he's just the greatest single person I ever met in my life.
Chuvalo was a really articulate guy for a long time after retirement. I know he's run into problems lately, but it was, I've seen him on documentaries, and he really was had great stories to tell and told them really well. I can remember as a kid seeing those fights with Chuvalo, and the only thing I can remember is Ali would throw a jab and pull it back. And as he was pulling it back, Chuvalo's hands would be going up to block it, that he was that much faster, that he was just so fast. I mean, it must be, for a guy like fights like Chuvalo to know that when he bores in on him, he's not going to be able to block punches, that his hands aren't fast enough to take care of Ali's punches, to block him or get him out of his face. It was just an amazing display.
Well, George said that just as you said, Ali lands 3 on your face. You go to counter, and he's 10 feet away from you already. And he said it's not. He's altering the reality. It isn't fair. You're not allowed to be that quick.
It's like Matrix.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Because Chuvalo was the first guy to go to distance, but he just said there was nothing like him. I mean, he said he never fought anyone completely like Ali. He said Ali was just the single greatest guy that he ever met, both in and out of the ring. And as you know, George lost 3 sons. He lost a wife to suicide, a granddaughter to cancer. So, I mean, George had it tough. But when those things happened, Ali was there for him. And Ali came to see him. Ali came up to hug him after George's wife committed suicide, just to tell him that he wanted George to know that he loved him.
Oh, that's nice.
It meant that much to him.
That's nice. Well, how about going to Oxford, Ohio, Miami University, to listen to some academics give talks on him? What heavyweight show? Can you see Floyd Mayweather doing that, or a heavyweight champion doing that? I mean, yes, we were celebrating Ali and talking about the importance of Ali, but nobody expected Ali to be there, to actually drive in from. He was coming back after a lunch break, and Ali was on Ali's time. He was never on time. He was late because he knew nothing got started until he showed up. So it doesn't matter when the afternoon session is supposed to start. It's not going to start till Ali's there. And on the way back, he was in a limousine, and there was a young black youth looked in the limousine and then did a double take, kind of like when he recognized him. Ali said, "Stop the car." Stopped the car. He got out, talked with the kid for a while, and then got back in the car and went on his way. But that's the kind of person he was, Stop the car. I don't know that person, but let me talk to him. Maybe I can say something to him that may hold for the rest of his life.
There's that famous film clip of him rescuing the young black man from the window, who was out on the window ledge of a building. Ali was across the street, and this is in Los Angeles. And so they got Ali to bring him up to the 28th floor. Ali leans out the window, grabs the man, and brings him in, this young kid. And Ali looked after the kid for the rest of his life.
Oh, jeez.
He didn't just do this for the publicity. He did it, and he's financially supported the kid and called him to see how he was doing. That was the way he was. And I think you might mention this in the book, as you know, the story when he waited for Sugar Ray Robinson at his club in New York. And Robinson, he waited hours in the winter, and Robinson just brushed by him like he was nobody. And he thought, I'm never going to do that to anyone. No,
he never did.
No.
If he was in the NFL, he would have been man of the year every year. He was an incredible force of nature.
I want to know what you probably had a similar reaction to a lot of other people when Sports Illustrated named Michael Jordan the man of the century, of the 20th century. How could you pick anyone other than Muhammad Ali?
Might say something about Sports Illustrated. It's impossible because Michael Jordan is an incredible basketball player. There's no doubt about it. But when you talk about man of the century, you've got to look at what his impact was outside of the sport. I think what the impact of the personality, what he did to make this world a better place, other than be excellent, superb in his sport. And when you do that, I don't see who's in front of Muhammad Ali. I mean, I'm really trying to think now. It's hard, you know. Maybe the Klitschko in Kiev is doing a pretty darn good job,
Right.
but I can't see anybody above Muhammad Ali.
One thing I wanted to ask you earlier was when he didn't go into the army, he refused induction. How much of that was the Nation of Islam telling him not to take induction? And how much was it his own moral persuasion, thinking this is wrong, I'm not doing this?
I think it was mostly Nation of Islam. Remember, Elijah Muhammad did the same thing in World War II.
Right.
And the members of the nation had convinced him that Muhammad, you go into the army, some cracker in the South is going to shoot you. Okay. They're going to send you to Alabama or Mississippi or someplace in the South to a training camp, and they're going to kill you. Okay. There's no doubt about it. And I think Muhammad believed that. I think he believed that there was a threat, and the nation was so strong in its not so much anti-war, but just you don't do it because you're not following them into American wars. So I think they were the vital influence in that. I mean, otherwise he would have been a Joe Louis. He would have gone in. He would have had he not been a member of the nation. Had he been like Floyd Patterson, he would have gone in, he would have gone to bases, he would have given exhibitions, he would have given talks, he would have done his year, and that would have been that.
Wasn't that offered to him, though? Wasn't he? Didn't they say you'll sit in an office and sign photos and stuff like that?
Well, they indicated that. But remember, who's he believing? Is he believing some, kind of white power establishment as he sees it, or is he going to believe the Nation of Islam? The people that are traveling with him, that are living with him, that are dealing with him every day. He believes he's in trouble. Not that he's going to be sent to fight in Vietnam. He's in trouble in the United States.
Do you think that? I mean, a lot of the draft boards consisted of Southerners, but why do you think they specifically targeted Ali because of his membership in the nation? He was so vocal.
No. Not really. I think, it was at a point where suddenly we were building up in Vietnam, so we just needed to draft a lot more people. And now what did the Louisville board that called him up, did they do that? Was it a political by them or was it intentional? I've never seen any indication that that's a fact, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, he's just saying, I mean, Ali himself said, why aren't they drafting Tom Seaver or Johnny Bench or whoever, baseball players or football players?
Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah, it's good. Good question. Good question.
Right. And of course, I wonder if he ever regretted that after. I mean, he was known to have said it made the comeback bigger. I got more money for the fights. But with the way the Nation of Islam didn't support him, you kind of wonder how he felt in the end.
Well, in a way, it was probably an important step, though it may have been generated by the Nation of Islam. It's one of the stands that made him very popular in America when America turns against the war, and they're looking for symbols of resistance, symbols that spoke the truth. It's not my war. It's, what am I going to go over a black man to fight yellow man, kill yellow man? In a sense, it made him more popular. Not at the moment, but a couple of years later, by 68, 69, suddenly now he's a prophet for a younger generation, for an anti-war generation. And soon that group is going to include a lot more people than are right-wing and support the war. And so that really made him popular, regardless of why he took the stand. He did take the stand.
Well, he becomes a world figure then, because people don't realize how loathed he was in the early 60s. in the middle 60s for joining the Nation of Islam, and then by the old guard when he stands up against the war, and then when he comes back. And I think one of the, would you agree that one of the things that helps his popularity was after he wins in the Supreme Court, he's not bitter. He doesn't show bitterness. He doesn't countersue. He doesn't badmouth them.
Yeah.
He just says they did what they were supposed to do, and you can't blame him for that.
Yeah. And remember, he's unpopular in the United States, but he was popular in a lot of places in the world. I mean, really popular. I mean, when he became champion, the first place he goes, he doesn't make the obligatory tour of Europe and fight some European fighters and make money. He goes to Africa. You know, he makes a tour of northern part of some of the countries in northern Africa, and you know that means a great deal for him being a world champion.
Yeah, I read somewhere, I don't know if it's true or not, that he tried to see Nelson Mandela, but they wouldn't let him. So I don't know if that's apocryphal or if it's.
At that time in the early 60s, my guess is no. He didn't go to South Africa. You know, he was in Ankara, and he was in, you know, a couple other places in the northeastern Africa, but he didn't go to South Africa. So I've never really read that.
I'm not surprised, though, that when he met Nelson Mandela years later, Mandela said he was listening on radio to the Liston fight, but also to what was happening with Ali in America, and that what Ali was standing up for meant a lot to him.
I believe that. And I don't know Mandela's history that well. I don't know, you know, when he went to Robben Island and when he, you know, exactly, you know, where he was at different times.
Right. There's a great story where Mandela's in the United States after he's released, and he's in Hollywood, and he's old, so he's tired, and all these, you know, Hollywood celebrities are looking at him, talking to him, but like all celebrities, they're looking over his shoulder to see if there's someone else to talk to, and he's sitting down, he's almost asleep, and then his eyes light up, and he stands up, and who's there, and his tears in his eyes, and who's walking towards him? Muhammad Ali. And
Yes.
The people that were there said it was the greatest embrace they ever saw.
Well,
You know,
it's two champions embracing each other, and it's if you say what person was better known in the world in the 20th century or second half of the 20th century, it may be Muhammad Ali. He was, I think, in the Guinness Book of World Records, I think, listed him as the most known. But Nelson Mandela then would have been right up there with him. I mean, you know, these are two truly iconic individuals.
Absolutely. You know, George Chuvalo said to me about himself, he said, I was famous because I fought Ali, not because I fought.
Yeah.
You know, Ali's fans number in the billions around the world. So because I fought him, I was known by his fans. That's why people know me.
See, that's Chuvalo. That, you know, that is a great statement, and probably a truer statement hasn't been made. And it shows the importance of Ali, that you're famous because you had a brush with somebody who truly was famous, who truly was significant, who made a difference.
Well, here's something I had learned, but I didn't know George knew this. I asked him, how did you feel about Muhammad in the 60s? And he said, well, I support him. He had a right to change his name and his religion. It's no one else's business. And then he said something to me which blew my mind, because he's a prize fighter. He said, the Vietnam War was based on the domino theory, which was obsolete. And I thought, George Chuvalo, how would a prize fighter know that?
You're just confirming my opinion that Chuvalo was a smart guy.
Yeah, he just said, you know, they thought every. I said, I know what the theory is, George, that if Vietnam falls, every Asian country in Southeast Asia will fall. And he said, right, but it was obsolete. So Ali was doing the right thing.
Well, tell me this, Lou. I wrote a book on on Vietnam, history of Vietnam. Did Chuvalo learn that from my book?
He may have.
Did he say, I read Randy Roberts' book on that subject, and that's what I got out of it, because that's more my students get out of it.
I wouldn't doubt it, because I mean George. I mean, now he's got severe dementia, but he was very well read, and he was up on politics, and he was just the Vietnam War upset him greatly because, from his viewpoint, young people were being sent off to die, and he said the United States and the world needs these young people.
Well, that's a compliment for the educational system that you have up in Canada. You're doing a good job.
Thank you. I might be the exception to that, but I've got about 1,500 more questions, but I know we've taken up a lot of your time. I can't tell you, it's the greatest thrill for me of my life, next to the birth of my daughter, to have you on.
Oh, geez, thank you.
Because
let's do it again and talk about Lewis and Dempsey and Johnson
I'd
and
love
Sullivan.
that would bring me such joy, because as I'm sitting here, my bookcase is right next to me, and your books, I felt like a friend had died when I had finished reading your book.
Oh, thank you very much.
So I didn't want it to end. And the Dempsey book was brilliant. Papa Jack, I found in a bookstore here in Toronto, and I walked by it 3 times, and I thought, I must be seeing stuff. That can't be Papa Jack. And I was. And I just, my wife said, what are you doing? Grab it, buy it. I said, I've checked it. Who cares what the price is? You've been looking for it for how many years? Get the book. And I said, okay. And I got the book. I mean, it was just wonderful.
I appreciate that. Thank you kindly.
And you were, I thought, the best speaker on Unforgivable Blackness. I mean, your eloquence and the stuff you knew and spoke about Jack Johnson, who in himself is, the world can never know enough about him.
Oh, but I was so much older then and younger than that now. I don't have those opinions anymore.
Right.
I'm not as confident of them, but no, I appreciate it. I really do.
The thing is, I think with those books, and I can't wait to read the Mickey Mantle book, is because you bring them back to life. You put flesh on the bone. You put the reader in that time period right beside the athlete, beside the boxer.
That's what I try to do. And I try to, boxing is a great sport to write about, because it's not like a baseball game where you have these subtle shifts that 9 different players are making. And it's a very complex game to describe. But boxing, you're focused on 2 people, and you can watch the tapes. You can see, listen, how they fight, what they're trying to do, what the other one's trying to do. And so it's a wonderful sport just to write about the fights themselves. I love doing it. It's great.
Well,
and you have to build up before a fight. You have an end game. What do people think afterwards? It's been a pleasure doing this during my life.
Thank you. I have one last quick story to tell you. At the Hall of Fame in the early 90s, I was sitting there with Angelo Dundee, and we're at the Days Inn in the breakfast room, and Larry Holmes, all these great fighters are there. And we're all having breakfast. The TV's on and loud, but no one's listening. And then a story comes on about something about Mickey Mantle. Everyone stopped talking. You look at the room and their jaws dropped, and they just mouthed Mickey Mantle. As if God himself had appeared.
Yeah, that's a great story. Al Kaline, great hitter for Detroit, and when Mickey in '56, when he won the Triple Crown, Al Kaline almost beat him. It went down to the last day and runs batted in. But anyway, Al Kaline was signing autographs and baseball autograph session for money, and some younger person went to him and said, "You weren't half the player Mickey Mantle was." And Al Kaline looked at him and said, "Son, nobody was half the player Mickey Mantle was."
That's fantastic and true.
And true.
Yeah. Wow. The great Mick. Listen, where can people get Season in the Sun, Mickey Mantle? They can get it on Amazon.
Certainly on Amazon.com. It was actually, I've had another book out since then.
Okay.
But it's, it might be in bookstores, but they can get it on Amazon.com. They can get basically all my books on Amazon.com. What
is the other book you've had out since then?
I did a book on Boston in 1918. And I looked at 3 icons. It's called War Fever. And I looked at 3 kind of not competing stories, but intertwined stories of 3 celebrities. I look at it's the year that Babe Ruth stops being a pitcher and becomes a hitter. He's both a pitcher and a hitter at that time. A guy by the name of Karl Muck, a German composer who's the head of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, who gets in trouble with a repressive government and gets thrown into a kind of detention camp that he shouldn't have been thrown into. And then the other one is a guy by the name of Whittlesey, who becomes America's greatest war hero in World War I, and has a tragic ending. So it's kind of intertwined stories called War Fever.
I'll pick that up. Babe Ruth hit his first home run in Toronto.
Did he?
For the Providence Grays.
Okay,
he hit this. They were a minor league team, and this was, I think, 1913, 1914. And so I wanted to verify, so I called Cooperstown, and they gave me the names of baseball historians in Toronto who I met with. So one guy had an interview from 1971 with the kid who was selling programs during the day. Because the story in Toronto was he hit the ball, it was at Hanlon's Point, this island, and the ball went into Lake Ontario. And the kid said it didn't go into Lake Ontario because that would have been an 800-foot home run. It went into the stands. And he said, what happened next? It was thrown back onto the field. And the reporter said, why? And he said, because no one knew Babe Ruth then. No one knew. He hadn't hit a home run yet.
How much would that ball be worth today?
Well, people are still looking for it. I tried to get money for a show to look for it. It was rumored it's in Lake Ontario. It was on a bar in Toronto. Other places have rumored to have it. But the thing for that day was he pitched a one-hitter in the next game. And I can send you the thing from the newspaper report and the report from the kids. So it's a fascinating story. He was just here for that game. That was it.
In 1918, it was interesting that his manager did not like him being a hitter. Okay, I mean, it's a nice thing, but he's a left-handed pitcher. He's the best left-handed pitcher in baseball. What do you want? A guy that swings for the fences, and it wasn't an era that was famous for home runs. It was famous for the kind of the dead ball era. And so Babe Ruth, he heard the fans and the kind of reception he got when he hit the long ball and hit the home runs. And so it's something he didn't get as a pitcher. And so he wants to be a hitter, and his manager still says, no, we want you to be a pitcher. And Babe Ruth leaves the team during the year and kind of finally comes back. I mean, it's kind of an interesting story. And all this time, there's a war going on in Europe. And then my book ends, and the book came out during the COVID year, because my book ends with the coming of the influenza in 1918, that, and its impact on America. So that's kind of the fourth character in the book, is the coming of influenza, which is taking place all over that year.
Wow. I have one last question for you before I let you go.
Shoot.
That's all right. Did the 1960s make Ali, or did Ali make the 1960s?
There's no definitive answer to that one. Probably there would have been the 1960s without Ali, but it would have had to make its own Ali. It would have to found those same qualities that Ali brought in somebody else. So, in every era, you have somebody who's kind of sums up the zeitgeist of the period. And Ali sums up the zeitgeist, the worldview of America in the 1960s, and maybe the world in the 1960s.
Right. That's a great answer. Randy, I can't thank you enough. And as you said, I'd love to do it again and to talk about your other books. And it's been an absolute privilege and a tremendous pleasure to have you on. Thank you so very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lou.
You do well, and we'll speak to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. That was great. Eric, you there?